Bruno's picture is not even there. Never mind. 45 minutes.
Ready? Yeah, we don't have a picture of him, but he's okay. He's okay. Okay?
We're going to be an active audience.
Great to have you. Okay, let's get started. Welcome everyone, both here in the room as well as online, and this is being live streamed, which is wonderful. This is the session on gender responsive climate finance, designing inclusive investment mechanisms. And I will introduce the topic a bit, and then I will let the speakers introduce themselves. We often hear that women are the most affected by climate change, and while that's true, framing women as vulnerable victims doesn't attract investment. And today we're focusing on women as drivers of climate outcomes and building on the evidence that investing in women delivers measurable climate impacts. I've been recently pushing finance leaders to look beyond two narrow categories of women that I keep hearing them talk about as either beneficiaries or entrepreneurs. And I think this is so much larger. Women are farmers, women are project managers, women are leaders of cooperatives, et cetera, they fall outside the boxes. Meanwhile, despite years of advocacy efforts, less than 1% of climate finance reaches women's organizations. One reason we're stuck is because we've relied on philanthropy and policy shifts while not speaking the language of investors or using mechanisms that they are already funding. So today we're going to talk about two of these such mechanisms, carbon markets and outcome-based finance. Because women's empowerment is not just a social good, it's a measurable driver of climate impact and financial returns. So we are going to explore how outcomes-based finance is unlocking a new class of investable opportunities that delivers results for women, for their communities, and the planet. And so our speakers here today represent philanthropies, carbon project developers, and finance strategists who are going to share with us practical models that align capital flows with gender equity and sustainability. So you as listeners, as the audience, will gain insights into how investors, corporates, and carbon buyers can capture what we're calling the gender dividend to scale gender responsive and inclusive climate action. So I'm going to take the liberty to be the first speaker, if you'll allow that, just because I'm going to introduce quickly the W Plus standard. W Plus standard is the world's first standard certification system that measures, quantifies, and monetizes women's empowerment results at the project level or within the supply chain activities. And we built this, WOCAN itself is an NGO, women-led network organization who's got a lot of years of experience doing gender mainstreaming training, capacity building. And it was about 11 or 12 years ago when we realized that is not sufficient to drive the needle. And we wanted to come up with a model to incentivize the projects that we were working with in agriculture and natural resource management who weren't quite doing enough for gender equality. So what more could we do that could incentivize that change, number one? And number two, we at WOCAN believe very strongly in the power of collectives, of women's collectives, women's groups, organizations at the local level, and even at all levels. But again, these are vastly underfunded and I would say under-recognized. So we thought, is there a way we could derive a new revenue stream to these organizations to allow them to sustain themselves, but also to do so much more? So at the time, we were learning about carbon markets, and we thought this is interesting because this is the same problem that carbon markets was provided the solution for, which was there was a lack of capital flowing into good quality forestry projects, for example, around the world. And so the idea was create something that creates a credit out of an outcome, and then create it as a market-based mechanism, right? So we thought that's interesting. Could we do that for women's empowerment, gender equality? So we were working with women in rural Kenya and rural Nepal, and we said, what would we measure if we were to measure women's empowerment? And they outlined for us 6 categories that, to them, were the qualities that mattered for their empowerment. And it's not just income. It's also time. It's also health. It was also knowledge. And even food security was related to their sense of empowerment as well as leadership. So then our team developed qualitative and quantitative indicators for each of those 6 domains, we call it. So the idea is that a project or a supply chain, initiative of a supply chain, can use any of those 6 domains that seem relevant to its particular outcomes that it's producing. So it's the same rigorous methodology of carbon markets. It starts with a baseline study, and then there's some activities, and then there's a measurement of the results. Those results are then analyzed according to these domains and the metrics that are developed. And what's generated is then a W plus credit, similar to a carbon credit, but not a carbon credit, just a measurement of women's empowerment. So a W plus credit, 1 credit equals a 10% change from a baseline to a result situation, right, an impact, times the number of women that are affected by that change. And the difference we made from the carbon standards was because we want to see this money flow back into women's hands, we said at least 20% of the value of every W plus credit that is sold must be returned, or the proceed must be given as a cash transfer to the women's organizations inside the project area for determined needs. Now, it turns out the first project we did this, we watched to see what women decisions were on how to spend that money. They used it for things like building a water supply, for diversifying a kitchen garden, for putting into their savings and loans. We realized then this is adaptation. These are adaptation activities, right? We've been able to talk about use of mitigation finance, because this was a project, it was a biogas project in Nepal, and it was producing carbon credits, but not paying any attention to the social impacts. It was because it wasn't measuring it, it didn't see it. So as a result of that, we realized that this is a case where it's a mitigation project that can fund adaptation results through the benefit sharing. So that's the story of the W+. I know you'll ask me a lot of questions. Who buys the credits? We're attempting to build that market. It's not easy. It's a standalone standard. It produces W+ credits, but the market for social impact credits is very small and very immature. We also can link it to a carbon credit, or to a biodiversity credit, or a water credit, or a plastic credit. And that is actually a more likely pathway to market, just because corporates are already purchasing carbon, and if they have a chance to add a W+ onto it, it's just a lot easier in the system. As well as that, there's Bruna, who was supposed to be on the session here, is an investor, and she would tell you that because it's a quantified credit, for investors, it's an asset class, right? So it now provides a way for investors to get social returns because it's a quantified credit unit. So I will stop there. And I'd like now to move on and have our first speaker, Anna Maria. I'd like you to introduce yourself quickly. And then I would like to ask you the question, Anna Maria is from Gates Foundation. What role do women in agriculture play in the foundation's climate resilience strategy, and how does the W Plus standard help amplify their contributions?
Yeah, thank you very much, Janet, for the invitation. So let's start by introducing myself. I am the Director of Adapted and Equitable Food Systems under the Agricultural Development Program of the Gates Foundation. And that means that I lead our portfolio in relation to advancing innovations for small-scale producers. We have a focus on small-scale producers, especially women farmers, so that they can respond better to climate variability and in general climate change. At the same time that we are promoting innovations that help in terms of increasing the consumption of a healthy diet. So we have a very strong nutrition dimension, and it's really interesting how with the expansion of the climate work of the foundation in the agricultural development program, what we have seen is that this connection between climate, gender, and nutrition makes a lot of sense, and we have been producing a lot of evidence with a lot of partners, including the World Bank and the Gender Innovation Lab, on different evaluations on how when women farmers are the ones making the decisions in terms of the crops that they grow, in general, the family eats better. They adopt more sustainable practices. They take care of natural resources. So we see a lot of opportunities to innovate in terms of this linkage. So going to your question, Janet, in terms of what's the role that women small-scale producers play in our strategy. So we have a very specific niche in the work that the Agricultural Development Program supports, and it's very much focusing on innovation and basically accelerating innovation. So we have a lot of expertise on that, and our type of investments respond to that. But at the same time, from the very beginning of the way that we start thinking about innovations, we include this understanding of women farmer needs. So just to give you a simple example, a lot of the work that we do, it's in terms of breeding for producing varieties or seeds that respond better to droughts, for instance. So what we do is that since these breeding processes take many, many years, we, from the very beginning, try to understand what are the different traits that should be considered in the breeding programs, because they are not the same for men and women farmers. So, for instance, men, what we have seen in this analysis is that men prioritize marketability, profitability, while women take into account, for instance, time of cooking or early maturity. So those different preferences need to be taken into account from the very beginning of the process of building and thinking about this innovation. So women are at the core of what we do from the very beginning, but also because our main objective in the Agricultural Development Program is to make sure that these innovations are benefiting these small-scale producers in an inclusive way. And just if you think about numbers, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in South Asia, more than half of the farmers are women. So if you don't deliver these innovations that respond to women needs, then we are never going to be able to be successful with our investments. So they are at the core of what we do. We work a lot on women's empowerment because we believe that that brings a lot of opportunities. It's not only increasing the incomes, but it's also making sure that women have the opportunity to make decisions in terms of these innovations. It's not just giving, for instance, the climate information to women, where we do a lot, but it's making sure that they have the power to make decisions based on that climate information in terms of their crops. So one example again of the way that we see that in our strategy is the work that we have been doing with WOCAN on the W Plus standard. And the idea, as Janet said, was to perhaps quantify something that usually is not being quantified, or to make visible something that usually is invisible, and to be able to trade and to put a price somehow and monetize these efforts in terms of outcomes for women related to climate, and then being able to bring those resources back to these women organizations. So I think that so if I could summarize, Janet, what I would say is that our strategy in the agricultural development program of the foundation is not going to be successful if we do not prioritize women farmers from the very beginning of the innovation pathway, so the research and development, all the way into the delivery. So it's at the center of the work that the Gates Foundation does.
Could you please mention your big bet strategy?
Yeah, so we also have been narrowing our portfolio in some what we call these high impact areas of work where we believe that we can make a difference. These are, we call them big bets because they are bets at the end of the day, so they are risky, but the potential for impact is so big that it's worth making the effort. One of those is something that we are calling carbon crediting for adaptation. And the idea of this is to help to bring resources to small-scale farmers, both men and women, to implement climate-smart agricultural practices and technologies, acknowledging that one of the main barriers for these communities to adopt these technologies is that many times they have to pay upfront investments or like to buy equipment, and they don't have the resources to do that. We see an opportunity for practices that are interesting in terms of mitigation, therefore that can participate in the carbon market, but at the same time that are interesting in terms of adaptation for these farmers to be able to participate in these markets, making sure that they are benefiting from this participation and from these resources being able to use it to implement climate-smart agricultural practices. And the ways that we are thinking about the contribution of the foundation into this is reducing the transaction cost of digital MRP. Also thinking about innovative ways of aggregation of small-scale producers, because that's one of the reasons which is challenging for these communities to benefit from the carbon markets, because they are small by definition. So finding ways to aggregate them so that they can participate in the markets, they can receive benefits, and then can implement climate adaptation solutions. And then what we are doing and exploring with WOCAN is try to see if the W Plus standard can be put on top of the carbon credits so that we can get more people that are interested in contributing on these women empowerment outcomes, and then being able to bring those resources back to the women communities.
Brilliant, right? I can't wait to see this happen. Another stream of revenue for women farmers, very much needed. Okay, sticking on the carbon markets thing, I'm going to turn to Sandeep. Now, you don't know, well, you do know Sandeep here sitting in the room, but for those of you on the audience, he graciously agreed to be our fourth speaker today because Bruno Resende had to leave. So, Sandeep, introduce yourself and then talk about how you as a carbon project developer see value in the W Plus standard. Yeah, I'll start with you there.
Yeah, thank you, Jeanette, and thank you for having me here. I'm Sandeep. I lead an organization called VNV. It's a social enterprise that works with smallholders for them to access carbon finance. Smallholders for us is both smallholder farmers, growers, as well as coastal smallholders, because I think these are the two community segments for us which are most affected by climate change. And a lot of the work is in South Asia, which is where the millions that have to be worked on. Why W Plus for us? I think, and I've known Jeanette for a while, and we've been talking to each other, I think, for the last 8 years. And I always struggle with the idea of, we have the carbon programs which already have a lot of inbuilt monitoring / indicators on development indicators, let's just put it that way. But then I realized over a period of time that what we were doing was we were ticking boxes, right? I mean, we had a lot of carbon standards that asked us to do SDG 5, SDG 13, SDG this, SDG that, and we were basically filling up some boxes, and an auditor would come, look at the carbon side of things mostly, check receipts, check everything, and more or less just ask people, is this true? And that's it. And that, for me, I think, given the carbon market that we are going to see or are seeing, buyers are demanding a lot more. Buyers are demanding more in terms of data. Buyers are demanding a lot more in terms of specific gains that they want to see from a carbon project. And gender is just one of them. And we are also working on other kinds of parameters. For example, some of our carbon buyers just want water as an output. Some want only biodiversity as an output, and biodiversity again in different pillars, and some want gender as an output. So we do believe that there is going to be a buy segment. I don't think it's going to be a huge buy segment, but there will be a segment of buyers who have very specific climate targets, and then they will club a carbon with that specific, a specific development target, and they will club the carbon climate target with that development target. This is what we believe. And that's what led me to actually look at W+. Also, it makes our program a little stronger. I'll give you an example. She looked at one of our mangrove programs, and I think they came back and said, sorry, you don't get any credits. And I was like, wow, man, I already have a buyer for the credits. And she was like, no, because we were not doing enough. And it kind of helps, right? Because if you're not doing enough, then why the hell should you get the credit? But I was clearing a carbon project very easily. So that tells you something, which is what I think we want to, if we want to increase more trust in the markets, we have to increase more transparency. And now we are mobilizing a lot more to do. It's a mangrove project. We just had women planters and we have one women-led enterprise. And she's like, that's not enough. Great. So now we're doing a lot more to make that happen, which is a good thing, I think, for our programs. We run more than 100 programs. If even 50% of them have something that increases more gender. Because for us, we actually look at gender also as a risk management thing. It's not just a good to do. Our programs span 15 to 20 years. Both gender and children for us is very important because it's intergenerational. And without their leadership and involvement, we will never have these programs last more than 5-10 years. So it's actually a risk management. That's what we go to investors and say, guys, this is not just about you feeling good about life. It is about protecting your money. And which is where I think we need to change that whole narrative, saying, oh, but let's do something for gender. No. You are investing in a 20-year project. Let's make everything watertight. And gender and children education is, I think, very, very important. So that's why I think we went with W+, Jeanette.
So I love this story because this shows that our dream of the W+ is working. And I really appreciate Sandeep's honesty and transparency about this, right? You were pretty angry with me when I told you. But anyways, the fact that, he gets it, like this helps us improve our performance. That's exactly what we designed this to do. So kudos to you. Sandeep, can you describe the two VNV? We haven't given up on your mangrove project yet. Your initial thing, right? Can you describe your two projects where you're using the W+ standard?
Yeah, I mean, the first one is like our poster child project. Let's just put it that way. It was a project that was very close to my heart because I think that was the first example of blended finance, which we throw around a lot these days. But this was in 2014, right? And there's women salt farmers in an area called Kutch in the western side of Gujarat in India, where these women would take these diesel pumps in a hand cycle to take it all the way to the salt farms because you had to pump water. More water you pump, the more salt you get. So that was. And mostly these were a community called Agadiyas, which is basically a salt farming community. It's generational salt farming community. And what they would do is they would use these diesel pumps and pump water. And it was a beautiful place. Kutch is white, and it's beautiful. You would see black soot all over. It was a disastrous sight. And I remember going there once and I was like, listen guys, not just me, there were a lot of other people. That was, I think, our first experience in multi-stakeholder solutioning. Or whatever you call it these days. So, yes, I mean, there was IFC, there was a bank, and there was so many people. Then it came around that most of these women did not have credit access at all. And a solar pump would cost them almost $3,000. They didn't have the money for it. So we came up with this whole thing that, okay, now so there was a guarantor, there was first loss guarantor, there was a guarantor for the loan, the liability was transferred to someone else. and then they could access the solar pump. So suddenly Kutch became clean again, right? Because with solar pumps, you are pumping 18, 16 hours, it's okay. You can, because the battery systems kicked in. So in a way, a lot of these women then started to really appreciate this, and this went from 100 to 200 to a lot more women. But the idea was this was a gender program. It was an energy access program, but we never saw the gender lens, right? So when I was talking to her, and we were like, okay, let's pick up one pilot. So then we said, okay, let's look at this pilot, and and because this is the 10th year of that program, so it's a program that has been going on well. It's been successful. It sells carbon credits. A lot of that carbon revenue goes towards repayment of the credit because it was 15-year credit. So it was a 0% loan basically. So the carbon credit revenue would pay for the entire interest cost for the entire 15 years. That was the idea. So yeah, I mean, it's a very successful program, and W Plus now will help us. And she said 20% to community, 80%. That's not what we want to flip that, because I don't think otherwise we're making any sense out of it, for me at least. We think that added W Plus credit can go towards more of their leadership building in their thing, because now we want them to be a cooperative. And this is an interesting one, if I could take 10 seconds more. We want them to, because their salt farming is only for 8 months. Actually, it's for 7 months. The rest of the 5 months, these solar panels, they just go back to the shed. So we spoke to the government and said, can we just generate power and feed it to the grid? And the government was okay with it. They were like, for the rest of the 5 months, what you guys could do is just place the panels on the Kutch region, and we will get you a grid to supply that credit to, and they would get paid for that electricity generation. That infrastructure needs a little bit more money. So the cooperative needs money. That is where I think W Plus can help, because then they become sellers of power over a period of time. These guys' credit history has gone up significantly, a lot of them, and so that is where I think W Plus comes in. If you can get them more revenue, all of this becomes an ecosystem, and I think that's what we believe in, and hopefully we will transition from this project in another 3 years. We are done. It will go back to the community cooperative, but this W Plus will possibly keep them more sustained in the long run. So that's
Excellent. And what I always say about this is the use of carbon revenue, carbon finance to fund women's empowerment, right? I don't know of a lot of other stories like that, but I think that's a very powerful story here. You want to say anything about the buyer interest? I know you mentioned a little bit, but...
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So we did manage to convince a few of our buyers, saying, they were like, but some of these buyers, they really care. And that's why in the carbon markets, everybody thinks, this is a carbon buyer. But no, a lot of them actually are doing it because they're serious about it. And they do also work with us, because our motto, our theme has been always making markets work for adaptation since 2009. We've been like, that's what we want markets for, and I think they get that. So a few of them, we've been like, listen, would you value something like this? They said, of course we would. So yes, we spoke to at least 2 or 3 of our premier buyers, let's just put it away, long relationship, 10, 12 years, they know us, we know them. And we said, would you pay a higher price for this? They were like, we will not pay you a higher price, we'll just pay you a different price for this, however you want to do it. But we would want the same transparency that we would look from a carbon project, and I'm okay with that. So yes, we have, at least the Mangrove project already has a buyer, but I don't have credits. So that's why I was not very happy with her. I was like, listen, we finally have a buyer, but what are we doing? But truth be told, I think you did the right thing, and I respect that. But the solar pump credit, we are going to go to market, but I do see buyers taking this up. Do I see a lot of buyers taking this up? Time will tell. But we need to keep trying. I am a firm believer that if you don't have something to sell, you don't really know whether it's a market or not. We can't keep here speculating. I need a staple credit. I go to market to sell it. If nobody buys it, then I can say that there is no market for it. But I think it will be presumptuous. No, I mean, we cannot assume that. So, yeah.
Yeah, we're also just waiting for that to be able to announce these first sales, because we think that people don't know about this opportunity to use the W Plus. That's one of our greatest challenges, is they just don't know this is a possibility. So this is, we'll uncover it. Thank you. Shubi, your turn. So Shubi, you are working on she's a I'll let you introduce yourself, and then answer this question. You're working on a green finance accountability framework with grassroots women's organizations. What does accountability look like when it's co-designed by community women themselves?
Okay, I'll start off by introducing myself. I've been doing two things. One is working at MIT as a climate finance researcher, working across American cities and trying to understand what post-disaster financing landscape looks like and how can we make that more localized. And I'm also working with Wairu Commission, where over the past few months we have been facilitating learning exchanges between 10 plus grassroots-led organizations across Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Latin America to understand what climate finance looks like at the ground level. So from what we have been able to hear is, right now women do not even know about, they're not aware about existing climate finance mechanisms, let alone carbon credit or adaptation finance or the W+ framework. And they are using advocacy as a means to get more information on this. For example, in Nigeria, women farmers who regularly experience drought. So they're using local to local dialogues as well as promise tracking sheets to get government officials to come and participate in their community discussions and demand accountability towards climate finance. They have been doing this for the last 10 years to get to this stage where now they're invited to participate in discussions held in the government level around climate finance. In Nepal, for example, women are using transparency boards to amplify climate-related information across their community, and they're using transparency boards on the other side as well to demand accountability from the government officials to, again, demand transparency around existing or new climate and disaster reconstruction efforts or climate finance mechanisms. So what I'm trying to say here is, for women across these organizations in these contexts, accountability starts at the bottom, like you mentioned about starting from the very beginning, the very innovation of the project, of the idea. But here what I feel is innovation should not just be around finance structuring or stakeholder involvement. It should be integrated into the governance of the region, the systems. So, and other examples, other things that came up from the discussion were around how women empowerment indicators are currently measured as an outcome, and then the need is to translate that as a process. So I would be very interested in seeing how the W+ framework can be applied across institutions, across the process of how different institutions like Gates Foundation, philanthropy, and even carbon credit institutions are looking at climate funding and using that process-driven innovation to build accountability that women really want on the ground.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And other efforts that we are doing based on this W+ standard is on, for instance, bringing the Green Climate Fund to adopt this standard and to somehow mainstream and put it in the entire GCF portfolio, which would be amazing. So if you are using this metric to accept or not projects that the GCF is going to support, these can have multiplying implications for women organizations. So I just wanted to say that I think that it's a great point. If we are able to do it, Janet, I think that these can be very impactful.
Thank you. I think what we're talking about is also accountability to global policies or climate fund policies, mentioning GCF, which probably has the most progressive gender policies of all the climate funds. So we think if we could influence them, we can probably have some impact on other climate funds as well. That's the plan.
I
You can
just read this.
okay, that's fine. One other question should be for you. When you listen to women at the community level, what do they say success looks like? And how does that differ from what investors tend to be measuring?
Coming back to my point about outcome versus process, I think the W Plus framework is doing great work because we've heard conversations from women around, okay, we want to save up the time that we are investing in trying to access information, or the amount of money we generate every month, or having to travel X distance to fetch water. And the W Plus framework is doing great work at incorporating all of these different indicators into the different sections. But the need is to also have another set of indicators which look at process. So at Wiro, we are developing like an accountability framework to, this is co-designed with the communities, and these are all things that have come up in discussion. So things like inclusivity, transparency. So we're creating like a ladder. It should start with, okay, awareness around, okay, we do not know enough about existing mechanisms, and then demanding inclusivity through advocacy, and moving on to actually having representation in government councils. So more process-based indicators which include building awareness among women farmers or women-led organizations since the very beginning and of the project, or even just when you start thinking about the project. And these should not be one-off solutions, but how can the W Plus framework translate into lasting impact? So that right now has, unfortunately, because a lot of women farmers work with government, so it has to be integrated with government systems. So another innovation we could probably think about is how can the W Plus framework be applied to the subnational level. So how can municipal bonds we can apply the W Plus framework to municipal bonds that can be again sold to different investors and then translating credits into assets.
Okay, got you. Thank you very much. Okay, we have just a few minutes left, and I would just like to ask all of you one last thing. If outcomes-based, gender-responsive finance could become the norm, that's a dream, in 5 years, what would success look like?
So I would say that success is that we have women farmers that are empowered, that have the ability to be the drivers of transformation in their communities. And I think something that resonated very much to what you said, and it's something that the foundation has been working, it's on this idea that investing in adaptation, investing in resilience, investing in women farmers is charity. And we want to remove that idea from people because it is not. And perhaps it's our fault because we are not bringing enough the examples that we have seen. But we have plenty of investments in the Gates Foundation where we have been demonstrated that if you give women farmers the access to finance, the access to inputs, the access to information, they really do wonderful things that have very strong returns on the investment. So if we're successful, we'll have a lot of these women that are empowered to drive transformation in their communities.
What would success look like? I think just women, just every woman knowing that I can make money out of what I'm doing. You know, like them having enough awareness that there's frameworks like the W Plus framework or carbon credit mechanisms that exist to fund their child's education or, I think that's what I have to say.
Yeah, I think success would look like, and how do I look at any crediting, any unit? For me, the finance that is derived out of the unit is an enabling finance. It is not the be-all of all of the economic activity that can happen there. And I think the success will look, what it look like, at least from the work that I have done, is agency. Because the women don't own the land. A fertilizer subsidy you cannot access. A bank, because you don't have a bank account, it's in your husband's name. And even if you do, you hardly have any balance in that bank account. What crediting programs like W Plus and carbon credits or any other credits would do is give you that enabler to be able to access. So this is just a start point for the access to seeds, to better fertilizers, to better insurance. Crop insurance never reaches the woman farmer at the end of the day. They are the ones who are working on the field. So I think you have to look at credit finance always as an enabler. What we get wrong is credit is going to solve everything. It's not. But you have to use it very, very well. Seeds, farmer-producer organizations, warehousing, market linkages, that's what you need. Because once this crediting is gone, then what? You know, you're there for 10, 15 years, what are you going to do? So leave that enablers to create that self-sustaining economy. That's what success will look like, because then you have agency, and that's what we should be gunning for.
Those are all great answers. And I would just add that, you know, for me, women would start to be compensated for, maybe should be what you, I mean, I see women as contributing to the, not just the care economy of their household and their community, but to the planet. And they should be compensated for that global good that we are all benefiting from. And so I think if that could change the narrative, and women could be seen as investable entities, right? And not victims or charitable objects, right? I think that could also change and open up all kinds of, and we would have better climate outcomes as a result, right? And nutrition, exactly. Okay. With that high-level comment, aiming for the dream, I'd like to close this session. Thank all of you in the room for attending. Thank you to all the speakers, and thanks to everybody who's watching the recording online. We've really enjoyed this conversation, so thanks again.